Hi everyone, welcome back to Lo-Fi Apocrypha, where we talk about things that aren't that deep until it actually is. I'm your host, Mom Chalan, and today we're going to start off the episode with this pretty famous quote. It goes along the lines of, "Speak your mind, even if your voice trembles." I originally thought this was by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Turns out it's by the founder of the Great Panthers, Maggie Kuhn. And if you listen to my first episode, the one on Grace Ashcroft, thank you if you did, by the way, this quote of speaking your mind even when you're afraid, even when your voice trembles, is the complete embodiment of just bravery, where you stand on business even if you're worried, even if it gives you anxiety, you still push through. And that's definitely something that across the board, whether or not you resonate with the typical girl boss trope or you're more of the girl next door like Grace, it resonates with us. It's something that I believe is aspirational for everybody, regardless of who you are. There's something about that quiet confidence, you know what I mean, that just appeals to everyone and just even begrudgingly so earns everybody's respect. However, on that note, what about the flip side of that coin? If we're into the kind of courage that is quiet and timid, and is steadfast and all of that, what about the kind of courage that doesn't falter, that doesn't waver, that speaks very clearly and doesn't backtrack at all? The kind of confidence that says, I said what I said, and then backs it up later on by saying, I didn't stutter, I meant every word that I said. That's the topic for today. I know that sounds a little weird, but hear me out. So our subject for today is going to be about how that whole thing of being confident and embodying it and not having your voice wobble and standing 10 toes on business is Joan of Arc. Now, what has that to do with what I just said earlier about how it is that we get these really ambivalent feelings when it comes to people that are super confident? And there's a little anecdote about it. It's actually my sister's story. She told me about a professor that she had when she was in university, where the TLDR of it was that he said, the girl heard voices. She's not that special. She was weird. She heard voices. She's clearly mentally insane. She was probably schizophrenic. Let's move on. That dismissive behavior lived in my mind rent-free for the longest time, and now I want to unpack it because that's just unacceptable to me. So we know all of the good things, it's all a spectrum. It doesn't come in just one variety or flavor or genre. But the thing is, once someone starts speaking with that certainty, with that self-assuredness, do we still call that courage, or do we start calling it arrogance, delusion, or maybe even instability? So there's a kind of strength that we celebrate, and then there's the kind of strength that makes us uncomfortable to the point that we immediately try to compartmentalize that person in a negative way. And I just want to put a disclaimer out on this before I continue the episode, is that I am in no way, shape, or form trying to clinically diagnose or pinpoint whatever psychological issues might be underlying with the characters in this story, but just bear with me, hear me out. These are just my thoughts and ramblings. So this is where the story starts. My sister told me of one lecture that she was at during her university days about a professor that said the TLDR of it was Joan of Arc isn't all that. She's not special. She was just schizophrenic. And the lecture moved on like that explained everything. And I remember her telling me her feelings about it, how it was very upsetting and that she wasn't the only one in the class that was upset by it. And mind you, this was a very open-minded. She told me about how upset she felt about that. And honestly, when she told me that story too, I got heated. It was just so many thoughts rushing through my head. Like, how can you be such a dismissive bastard? Like, who gave you the right to diagnose this girl? Were you there? Were you able to interview her? Like, what? How is it that you read her story, take a look at all of like the historical documentation on this person, and then just immediately write her off as schizophrenic? So here it is. The story is basically about Joan of Arc and how she's the kind of strength that makes people feel uncomfortable in a way, and it really shouldn't. So here, let's set the stage here. Joan of Arc was 16 or 17 years old when she claimed that she heard the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and that of God. She was a peasant girl during the time of the 100 Years' War between Britain and France. And during that time, France was getting their backside handed to them over and over and over again, because Britain wanted to annex France as, a territory, as an extension of the United Kingdom. And there was nothing that France could do to push them back. And it had been that way for 100 years when Joan came about. Now, she belonged to this one backwoods hamlet that no one had ever heard of, called Domremy. And she lived on a farm. She had sheep. She lived there with her parents and her siblings. And she was just your typical devout Christian peasant of the time. She went to mass, she said her prayers, nothing particularly stunning about it. But then one day when she was in the forest, she claimed to have heard the voice of angels and saints. And here's the thing, these voices, which, my sister's professor and other skeptics further down the line, centuries after she's passed, claim these voices are what make her schizophrenic, or at the very least mentally unstable. These voices, the young girl claimed, were telling her that she needs to go and save France. Okay, now from the jump, no one's going to believe her. Again, let me remind you, we are in medieval France. She's a girl. She's peasant. She doesn't come from any money. She's uneducated. She can't even write her name. She doesn't have any military expertise. And why should she? She's a teenage girl. None of that. There is nothing there. She has no political connections. She's not even clergy. She has nothing, not a dime to her name. So really, she should have no reason to have this conviction. There is no reason, even if you looked at it from a religious perspective, there's no reason why she should be chosen to lead the French people to victory, to drive the English from French soil. Why would it be this peasant girl? And I guess that's where the pitfall comes for all of these academicians and scholastics that want to dismiss her as just some weirdo that needed medication, but medication wasn't around during that time. That it's just strange. Why should she be chosen? Why should she be chosen when she lived during a time when women did not have a voice, and the women that did have voices happened to be royalty and nobility? That's why they got away with the things that they did. But that's not Joan. She was basically a nobody from the boondocks. It was surprising that, their village was even on the map and hadn't gotten wiped out by the plague or something. So there is no reason that her delusions should have worked. She walks into a world of nobles, clergy, and military leaders, and she tells them point blank, no preface, no posturing, nothing. She tells them that she has been sent by God to save France. Now, if you think about it from our perspective right now, you have a girl from an unknown part of your country just come up to the most important government building and start saying, hey, I'm here and I'm going to take charge because God told me to do this for our people. You're going to look at her, you're going to call the police, and you're going to have her carted away to an institution. And in that respect, I understand where that university professor was coming from. But Joan, during a time again when women and peasants were nobodies, she came in and she did not ask. She wasn't negotiating. She was asserting. She was letting them know, this is how we're going to move. We're going to move different now, and I'm going to be the one to lead it. Honestly, guys, the audacity on this girl, even if, you're not Catholic or you're not into history, you cannot help but root for this girl because she just had the balls to say and do, or let's start off by saying, to say the things that no man in position at that time could. But not only did she say it, she made it happen. She was there in the front lines. Her conviction that Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and God himself had spoken to her and had charged her with this duty to raise her people up. You can't help but cheer for that kind of bravery, that kind of, call it, if you want to call it delusion, go for it. But she had results, and that, to me, at least, I'm just speaking for myself, should speak volumes of how amazing she was. And because of that, because she really had no background to assert and basically walk the talk, our modern day perspective of her is, she's schizophrenic. She had a condition. Really? Because she comes from a background that wouldn't necessarily know how to even lead. Because of that, she's just called insane. I don't know. That feels very unjust to me. This girl, Joan, she convinces people who have every reason to ignore her, to spit in her face, to toss her out of the castle, and maybe even drag her through the mud. This isn't someone quietly hearing voices. This is someone who believes that they can change outcomes. And not only did she believe it, she did it. It is recorded in history on both sides of the English Channel that she absolutely changed the tides of war single-handedly, that the nation of France changed forever. The trajectory of history changed because this girl was not only convinced, she convinced others, and she persuaded them to let her take the lead, to let her present results, and she did. And at every stage, this should have all fallen apart all of the things that she claimed, it should have fallen apart, but it didn't. And history has records of that. She isn't ignored. She isn't exposed. She isn't removed. But instead, she's validated over and over and over again by the reality of the things that she has performed. And we could make a very British sympathetic joke by saying, well, the French were so desperate that they were ready to put what eggs and apples they left in one basket held by some, feckless, stupid young girl that, didn't know her left from her right. They trusted her because they had nothing left. And you know what? Maybe that is true. But if that's the case, what does that say of the English when they had the military prowess that, dominated those isles and was bleeding into the rest of the European continent? What does that say of them if they got bested by a teenage girl? A teenage girl who's never held a sword in her life till that day when she, pulled up to Orleans and told the Dauphin at the time that, hey, guess what? God sent me to tell you to pull your head from your backside and get it together for your people. Yeah, so what does it say of those people then, or of the Brits that were claiming that they only trusted her because they're desperate? That they were willing to put their trust in a lunatic girl, suffering from hysteria, as it's been said throughout history. What does it say of them then? That you got pushed out by this girl, by this child, mind you, that we're calling delusional. She drove them out of her country. She rescued Paris, she rescued Orleans, and she was pushing them all the way back to Burgundy. She did that. She did that single-handedly, even when people called her insane. Is that really crazy then? Are we calling her crazy because she had the guts to walk her talk? To validate the fact that, maybe, just maybe, she did hear divine voices and she didn't just hear the ramblings of a brain traumatized by being born into a war and seeing war crimes left, right, and center as a child. No, it's not that. It can't be that, right? And so now, dear audience, I want to turn the question to you. And the question isn't just, what did Joan experience when those voices that she claims happened? It's not just that, not what did she experience, it's how do you explain what this girl did? That is the question that I want us to think about for a second here. How does someone dismissed as just quote-unquote delusional consistently produce real world outcomes unless we're all collectively hallucinating these results? How do we just dismiss this girl, this brave young child, as just delusional? Now, here's the thing that I want to point out, why it is that humans pathologize whenever they don't understand something. We're used to believing that everything can be explained, categorized, understood, contained into very convenient little boxes. And when something resists that, in this case, our Joan of Arc, we get uncomfortable. So we explain it in a way that gives us that control back. It's certainty discomfort, if you will. We're comfortable with doubt. We're comfortable with questioning, but we are not comfortable with someone who is dead ass certain. They're completely certain, and they refuse to soften that certainty. Everyone in that court of nobles, when she marched in and said, I need to speak to the Dauphin, they were like, who the hell is this girl? Someone drag her out and, I don't know, toss her in the river, check and see if she's a witch, because she's weird. Why is she coming in here? Why is this kid What village is missing their idiot right now? But she was so certain. She did not bend. And that kind of uncertainty doesn't read as confidence to us. It reads as insanity. See, like, Joan didn't fit in any category we recognize. So we create one that makes her easier to handle. And we call it a neurological explanation feels safer than a metaphysical one. Because it's just so uncomfortable to believe that A, God exists, B, God is interested in the affairs of man, and C, that he would choose someone that is basically, to the people in control at that time was just a booger with feet. Like, let's call it what it is. Women and peasants, zero rights back then. And safer, the safe bet is to say that, she's neurologically unstable. But safer doesn't always mean accurate. It just means you're more comfortable with it. Oh, there's a scientific explanation for why all of this happened. She was a nut job. Really? That's the take? That's what you got from this girl's outstanding 10 out of 10 performance? That she's just insane? Like, I want you guys to sit on that. So calling Joan mentally ill doesn't just describe her, it resolves her. It settles that discomfort that this upstart, this whippersnapper, can be compartmentalized into like a very convenient little disease. It takes something complex and disruptive and revolutionary, and it turns it into a closed case. Moving on, next topic, right? So I should probably be transparent here. I'm Catholic. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I have taught catechism for years at this point. And Joan of Arc is my patron saint. So yes, this is something that I care about. And yes, I feel like I'm going to be biased about it. But that's also exactly why I'm careful about how I approach this conversation. Because if my only response is, or my only defense is, I believe she was sent by God, then that doesn't really actually engage with the question. That doesn't really serve as a rebuttal to the professor. That's just me being religious, and that's not the argument that I'm trying to make here. What I'm interested in is why the opposite explanation, she was just mentally ill, is treated as sufficient. And I'm not okay with that. So at what point does explanation become a dismissal? At what point do we stop explaining the anomaly that is Joan and start explaining or looking into the reason why we need to even explain her to begin with? Why are you so uncomfortable with the fact that this teenage girl was able to make history, to change the fate of her people, to put a stop to the onslaught that had been going on for a century at this point? Maybe the question isn't whether Joan was explainable, but why we are so uncomfortable accepting her as, just a superhero that graced the human race. Just something for us to think about.